It was supposed to be just an ordinary night. My parents had gone out for a wedding anniversary dinner, and I stayed home alone, which was nothing new. The difference is that night, around 9 p.m., everything suddenly went out. A total blackout. At first I thought it was only here, but when I looked out the front window, I realized that the whole street was in the dark. I found it strange because the weather was good, with no sign of rain or anything. I took my cell phone to tell my parents, but the 4G just didn't work. No sign. That's when I heard the knocks, welcome from the back door. At first I thought you had imagined. I stood in the kitchen, in silence, trying to pay attention. And again, tum tum tum. 3 dry beats, spaced, as if someone was testing if there were people at home. I took the flashlight that I always leave in the drawer near the refrigerator and went calmly to the service area. The only window that gives a view to the back door is small and high, and even climbing on a chair, I couldn't see properly. There was something partially covering the light of the flashlight. It looked like someone, but he didn't mod. I was paralyzed there for a few seconds, until I heard a 4th beat, stronger than the previous ones. I got out of the chair, and tried not to make noise. I went to the front door to see if there was any sign of light on the street, but everything was still dark. It was strange how the silence seemed heavier than usual. Not even a dog barking, nothing. When I returned to the kitchen, I realized that the back door handle had moved. I saw it. It wasn't imagination. She turned slightly, as if someone was testing if she was unlocked. Luckily, I always lock the whole house when I'm alone. My heart raced. I still had no signal on my cell phone, and with the power out, there was no way to turn on the alarm. I thought about calling a neighbor, but I remembered that most of them traveled that weekend. I tried to stay calm and hid behind the kitchen counter, from where you could see the door. And then what scared me more, when I looked again, the flashlight I had left on the kitchen table was off, and I was sure I had left it on. I felt a chill down my spine. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't hear anything, but the feeling that someone was inside the house began to grow so strong that it made me eager. I took a knife out of the drawer, more out of despair than courage. I stood there in silence, holding the knife with both hands, trying to control my breathing. Time didn't seem to pass. I didn't hear footsteps or more beats, but I was absolutely sure that I was no longer alone. What scared me was the fact that everything was exactly in place, as if nothing had been touched, except the flashlight. When I got up and took a quick walk around the house, I noticed another strange thing. The social bathroom window, which I had closed earlier because of the wind, was ajar. There was a clay mark on the parapet. I just froze. I went back to the kitchen and locked all the internal doors with what I could. Chairs, a bench, even an iron. I locked the door to my room and locked myself inside. Even without power, I left my cell phone recording audio in the hope of picking up some noise. Anything that proved that I wasn't going crazy. I was in total silence, in the dark, just listening. At a certain moment, I heard a breath. It was soft, but close. I couldn't understand where it came from. After that, a very loud clutch echoed in the room. It looked like we'd being stepped on. At this point, I didn't know what to do anymore. My mind was trying to find a logical explanation for everything, but nothing made sense. Who would be walking inside my house in the middle of a blackout? Why were no windows broken? And why was everything so quiet after those sounds? I turned on the cell phone again, trying to see if the signal had returned. Totally out of area. The worst thing was when I tried to leave the room and realized that the doorknob was wet. I can't explain why this made me even more terrified, but it was as if someone had touched there a few seconds ago. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, trying to hear something. That's when I heard the most disturbing noise of the night, the notification of the house alarm going off, even without power. This could only mean one thing. Either the power came back without me noticing and someone forced an input, or the system worked on battery and detected movement. I ran out of the room, with my cell phone in my hand, and looked at the alarm screen. The last notification said movement detected corridor. I looked in the direction of the corridor, and for a second, I saw a shadow standing at the end of it. When I blinked, it was no longer there. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, staring at the empty corridor. That shadow had no defined shape, but it looked human. Tall, motionless, as if he were just watching me. My head was spinning trying to understand how that was possible. The power had not yet returned. My cell phone still had no signal, and the doors were still locked. I went back to my room, latched the door again, and shrungled in the corner. I don't know how long it took until I fell asleep, really exhausted, without realizing it. When I woke up, it was already day. The power had returned, the cell phone signal too. There were several messages from my parents asking if I was okay, because the blackout had affected the whole city. I reviewed the history of the room's internal camera, which resumed recording as soon as the power returned, and the scariest video was from about 3 in the morning. It clearly showed the back door opening by itself, slowly, even locked. And then, a dark figure standing for a few seconds in the center of the room, before disappearing from the image. I showed the video to my parents when they arrived. My father even tried to laugh, saying it could be a camera failure, but my mother turned pale. She asked us to change the back door lock on the same day. After that, nothing strange ever happened again, at least not that I know of. But to this day, I avoid being alone in that house at night. And if there's one thing I can never ignore again, it's knocks on the door during a blackout. I don't know what exactly entered that house, if it was someone or something. But I learned that, in total darkness, there are things that take advantage of our vulnerability. If you've ever been through something similar during a blackout, don't ignore it. It may not be just your imagination. It could be something, or someone, who just needs the darkness to get closer. It was supposed to be just another ordinary night. I was watching TV when, out of nowhere, everything went out. The whole house was silent. That kind of strange silence that only exists when there is no power at night. I waited a few minutes thinking it was something quick, but nothing came back. As had happened other times, I decided to go down to the basement to check the circuit breakers. I live alone in an old house, and the electrical panel is in a dark corner down there. I took the cell phone to use the flashlight, but it had 2% battery, and it died before I finished going down the steps. The basement was already scary on normal days. Icy cement floor, damp walls, and that strong smell of mold that never goes away. When I went down that night without light, and without a flashlight, the place seemed even more suffocating. I went carefully, groping the wall, trying to remember where exactly the light board was. But, before I even got close, I heard a snack coming from the bottom of the basement. A dry sound, as if someone had stepped on a piece of broken wood. I stood still, trying to listen better. At first I thought it was something in my head, but then came another sound. Steps. Slow, spaced, coming from a corner where there is absolutely nothing. I froze there for a few seconds, trying to rationalize what could be happening. Maybe an animal, I thought. A raccoon or what? But the steps continued slow, heavy, like someone's barefoot in the cement. I started to sweat cold. That didn't look like the sound of a small animal. And it made no sense for anyone to be there, inside my basement, in the dark, during a power outage. I thought about running up, but if it was really someone, I would be turning my back on danger. So I decided to take a step forward, slowly, with my hand against the wall so as not to stumble. But before I took the second step, I heard something breathing. It was a low breath, but heavy. It wasn't mine. It was coming from the bottom of the basement, along with the steps. And the worst, it seemed too close. I felt the sound resounding, as if there was someone there, a few meters from me. I tried to go back, but in that pitch I didn't even know where the ladder was. I shouted "Is there anyone there?" A little desperate, and the answer was the heaviest silence I've ever heard in my life. But seconds later, an object fell hard on the ground. It sounded like a box or something wooden. The blow was strong enough to echo, and at that moment I ran. I ran without the right direction, hitting my shoulder on a shelf and almost falling. I leaned on the floor and groved until I felt the side of the stairs. The wood was damp, as if it had condensed sweat or something worse. I went up the steps almost crawling, with my heart racing and the absurd feeling that someone was following me. When I finally got to the top, I pushed the door with everything, locked it, and walked away. I stood with my back to the kitchen wall, trying to hear if there was any sound coming from down there. But now, everything had returned to silence. The kind of silence that doesn't reassure. The guy who weighs. I sat on the floor still, trying to process what had just happened. My cell phone was still dead, and there was still no power signal. The street windows were all dark, so the blackout must have hit the whole neighborhood. I went to the drawer and took an old flashlight. I called, and for some reason it didn't work either. I got another one, nothing. That made me even more nervous. I lit a candle and stood in the corner of the kitchen, staring at the door that gave access to the basement, as if it would open at any moment. And that's when I heard the doorknob turn. The handle turned slowly, as if someone was testing the lock from the inside. I was completely paralyzed. I knew I had locked the door. I pushed the key myself and heard the click, but she kept moving, creaking slightly. The candle in my hand trembled so much that it almost went out. I took a few steps away, trying to breathe slowly, and wondered if it was all real, or if I was in some kind of nightmare. But it wasn't a dream. It was my house, and someone or something was in the basement trying to get out. After a few eternal seconds, the doorknob stopped. Nothing else happened. The silence has returned. I was waiting, my whole body tense, waiting for any new sign. But nothing. So I took courage and approached again, with a candle in my hand. I crouched to try to peek through the lower slit of the door. That's when I saw it. Not a face. Not even a foot. I saw a finger. A long, dark finger, slowly pressing the slit under the door. It was as if he knew exactly where I was. As if he were looking for me. Less than 2 palms away. I jumped back and the candle fell to the floor, going out immediately. I was in total darkness, panting, with my heart racing. My fingers were shaking so much that I could barely unlock my cell phone to try to call someone. But as I already knew, there was no signal. None. I tried Wi-Fi, nothing either. The blackout had knocked everything down. So I dragged myself to the corridor, trying to make as little noise as possible, feeling every step on the cold floor of the house. Every second seemed to last forever. All I wanted was to get out of there or for someone to show up. But I was completely alone. I lay down on the living room floor, far from the basement door, and was in total silence, with my cell phone in my hand, staring at the screen waiting for the minimum signal. And that's when I heard the basement door opening. Slowly, with that long creaking that echoes throughout the house. I knew it didn't make sense. I had locked it, I was sure. I didn't have the courage to look. I just stood there, lying on the floor waiting. The sound of the steps going up the stairs was soft, but real. They had gone up. Someone was inside with me. I dragged myself behind the sofa, trying to make as little noise as possible. My whole body trembled. The sound of the steps stopped at the top of the stairs. I held my breath, hoping it was my imagination, an error of perception, anything. But it wasn't. After a few seconds, I heard something moving around the house, stepping carefully, as if the person was trying not to be heard. But I heard it. Every step, each creaking of the floor. And at that moment I realized I was cornered. The front door had a chain. The one in the back was locked, or at least I thought. I took an object that was within reach, a lamp that fell when the light went out, and prepared to defend myself. Or to run. Whatever was more feasible. But nothing happened. Silence took over again. I didn't hear the steps anymore, or anything, until my cell phone vibrated. A voice notification. It was in my own line. An audio message sent to me. Trembling, I gave play. The recording was short, muffled, but you could hear it clearly. It was my voice. Whispering, "There's someone here." I had never recorded that. I was paralyzed. It was my voice, but I had never said that, much less recorded. The message had been sent a few seconds ago. That meant that someone had used my cell phone. Or worse, someone was watching me and recorded that without me noticing. I started crying in silence, trying to understand what was happening. I got up slowly and went to the nearest switch, clicking on it desperately, as if by some miracle the light could come back and get me out of that situation. The pitch was still absolute, and the only sound was that of my out-of-step breathing. That's when I noticed something on the floor, near the stairs. A rectangular object reflecting a weak light, another cell phone. It wasn't mine, it was an old model which I had never seen. It had the screen on, and it showed the camera activated. When I got closer, I saw that I was broadcasting live. The image? Me hidden behind the couch minutes before. Someone was watching me in real time, and used that cell phone for that. That's when I understood. The invader was already in the house before I even realized it. And somehow, he knew exactly where I was and what I would do. In an impulse of pure panic, I kicked the cell phone away and ran to the front door. I tried to open it with all my strength, but I realized that the chain was not just locked. Someone had put something outside, blocking it completely. I started screaming for help, even knowing that, at that time and with the energy out, few people would hear. I ran back to get my own cell phone and call the police, but it was already off. No battery. No signal. No way out. Everything seemed calculated, as if someone was playing with me, controlling every step. I don't know how long it took until the lights came back. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. But when the power came back, the house was empty. No sign of burglary, no object out of place, no trace of another cell phone. Just me alone, trembling, with the message still saved in my audio history. Until today I haven't deleted it. Every time I hear it, I remember the real fear of being watched, manipulated, cornered. And if you ever go through a blackout, pay attention to the sounds around you. Sometimes, darkness is not the worst problem. Have you ever experienced something strange during a power outage? Don't ignore your instincts. They may be the only thing warning you that you are not alone. That night, the rain started lightly, only the sound of water falling on the roof and some distant thunder. I was alone at home. My wife had traveled with the children to visit her mother-in-law. The forecast spoke of a storm, but nothing that worried me. Around 10 p.m., I was on the couch watching TV when the power went out all at once. Everything was completely dark and silent, only the sound of the rain getting more intense outside. I went to the kitchen to get a flashlight and decided to wait a bit to see if it would come back. It was common to happen because of the wind. About 10 minutes later, I heard a snap coming from the room. The window was open. I thought maybe I myself had left it badly closed before. I went there, closed it tightly and locked it. But as soon as I returned to the corridor, I heard another loop, this time coming from the room. When I got there, the window was also wide open. And not only her. The one in the bathroom, the one in the kitchen, one by one. They were all opening up by themselves. No strong wind, no apparent reason. I started walking from one room to another, trying to close everything again. That's when I touched my hand against the last window of the room, I saw another hand retreat quickly outside. It was so fast that, for a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks because of the dark. I saw that hand clearly. It was big, dirty, with long fingers and dark nails. I immediately retreated and closed the window tightly, locking the lock. My heart was racing, and the flashlight was shaking in my hand. The first thing I thought was, someone is outside, taking advantage of the power outage. I ran to the front door to check if it was locked. It was. The one in the funds too. Only the windows had been opened. And that left me with a horrible feeling that this person knew the house well. I went straight to get my cell phone, but the signal had dropped too. No light, no signal, and with someone outside trying to get in. Or worse, watching me. I locked myself in the room, pushed the dresser against the door and stood there in silence, trying to hear anything. The rain hit the roof hard, but between a gust of wind and another, I swore to hear footsteps in the backyard. And they were not hurried steps from those who flee. They were slow, dragged steps, as if the person was walking around the house calmly, waiting for something. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, without moving, just trying to understand if that was really real or if I was panicking. But then I heard a noise coming from the room, as if something glass had fallen. My body froze. I wasn't sure if it was the window that had broken or if someone had knocked something inside. I took scissors from the desk drawer. That's what I could improvise. I took a deep breath and pushed the dresser slowly, trying to make the least noise. My plan was to run to the bathroom, lock myself up, and try to call from there if the signal came back. I opened the door carefully, and everything still seemed dark. The flashlight light took only part of the corridor, and everything was silent again. But as soon as I took 2 steps, I heard a voice whispering very low. I couldn't understand what it said, but it came from the kitchen. It was a hoarse voice, almost as if there was someone trying to get my attention. The worst thing is that I didn't listen to any more steps. It seemed that whoever it was already inside the house. And just thinking about it, my legs started shaking. I decided not to go towards the kitchen. Instead, I walked slowly to the bathroom in the hallway. I locked myself inside, sat on the floor leaning against the wall, and waited for time to pass. The signal hadn't returned yet, so I tried to turn on the Wi-Fi and use any app that worked, but nothing. The house seemed swallowed by a tense silence, of those that you feel in your chest. But then a few minutes later, I heard a high-pitched sound of something scratching the corridor wall, right in front of the door where I was. As if someone was passing a knife there. Deliberate. My eyes were fixed on the light slit at the bottom of the door. Suddenly a shadow stopped there. I held my breath at the time. I couldn't see anything but the dark silhouette, motionless, as if it was just waiting for me to open. I was totally still, barely blinking, with my heart beating so hard that I thought I was going to faint. The shadow stayed there for a few long seconds, and then disappeared. But I didn't have the courage to leave. I stayed in there, completely motionless, waiting for something to happen again. I don't know exactly how long I stayed in there. Maybe half an hour, maybe more, until I heard a noise coming from the front of the house. It looked like the main door being forced. It wasn't someone trying to get in calmly. It was as if they were hitting, pushing, trying to break in. But nothing happened after that. The noise stopped, the silence returned, and I began to wonder if my mind was playing tricks on me. The storm was still roaring outside, but it seemed distant compared to the tension inside the house. When the cell phone signal finally came back, I immediately called a friend who lived 2 blocks away. I asked him to come to my house. I explained on top of that something very wrong had happened. He arrived a few minutes later with a powerful flashlight, and we searched everything together. No broken doors, no broken windows. But on the corridor wall, right where I heard the scratch, there was a thin and deep scratch, as if something pointed had really been dragged there. After that, I became obsessed with checking the security cameras. Most stopped recording during blackout, as expected, but an internal camera, which records directly on the memory card, recorded a very short video excerpt before turning off. In it, you could see the back door opening by itself, and a shadow entering. It was like a tall, motionless silhouette that simply appeared at the entrance. I couldn't see the face or clothes. Only that stopped for a few seconds, and then, the recording was cut. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. I changed the locks, installed new sensors, and avoid being alone at home during storms. But every time the light goes out, I still feel that same chill. I don't know if someone really came in, or if that was something that shouldn't be there. Here's the warning. Blackout is not always just a problem in the power grid. Sometimes, he brings things that preferred the dark. I work in a convenience store that is open all night, in a half-isolated area of the city. I had already gone through some weird situations there, like drunk customers or people who come in just to hide from the rain, but nothing that really worried me. But that morning, around 2 and a little, something happened that to this day gives me chills just remembering. It started with a blackout. The lights flashed twice, and then everything went out for good. Just the silence and the light noise of the rain outside. I went to the back of the store, where the generator panel is. It was my protocol at those times. Check the circuit breaker, activate the emergency system, and wait for the energy to stabilize. I was already used to it, but that night everything seemed different. The air got heavier, as if there was someone breathing near me. When I turned to go back to the counter, I heard a loud pop coming from the front of the store, where the automatic door is. The door shouldn't work without power, and the sound was as if someone had forced her hard, or hit the glass. I thought someone had tried to enter by force, so I slowly went to the front of the store, with the cell phone in hand using the flashlight. The cell phone light was shaking because my hand was already sweating cold. When I approached the door, I saw that it was ajar as if it had been forced, and outside, only the pitch of the street, no movement, no car passing by. I got there for a few seconds, trying to hear any noise, but I could only hear a very low buzz and the distant sound of the rain falling on the asphalt. I decided to lock the door with the manual locking, and went straight to the back of the store, locking the warehouse door as well. But as soon as I touched her, I heard slow steps in the hallway of the snack section. They were not hurried or heavy steps. They were soft, as if someone was walking barefoot, trying not to be noticed. No door was opened except the front one, and I was sure that no one came in. I was alone there, or at least I thought I was. I thought someone had tried to enter by force, so I slowly went to the front of the store, with the cell phone in hand using the flashlight. The cell phone light was shaking because my hand was already sweating cold. When I approached the door, I saw that it was ajar, as if it had been forced, and outside only the pitch of the street, no movement, no car passing by. I got there for a few seconds, trying to hear any noise, but I could only hear a very low buzz and the distant sound of the rain falling on the asphalt. I decided to lock the door with the manual locking, and went straight to the back of the store, locking the warehouse door as well. But as soon as I touched her, I heard slow steps in the hallway of the snack section. They were not hurried or heavy steps. They were soft, as if someone was walking barefoot, trying not to be noticed. No door was opened except the front one, and I was sure that no one came in. I was alone there, or at least I thought I was. The silhouette was still there, standing still. I tried to understand what I was seeing, but the image was too grainy. The person, or whatever it was, had something in their hand. I enlarged the image and realized it was my badge, which I had left on the counter before the blackout. How had he taken it without me noticing? And why were you just holding that, without doing anything else? Of nowhere, the screen went out. The generator was still working, but the cameras stood. That made me completely panic. I waited a few minutes before leaving the stock. The store was in absolute silence again. I crossed the corridor slowly, with my heart in my throat. When I got to the counter, there was no one, but the badge was there back in the exact place where I had left it. It seemed that nothing had happened. At that moment, the energy from the street came back. All the lights in the store came on at once. The automatic door opened by itself, making that usual sound. And for a brief second, I swear I saw someone standing outside, looking at me, before disappearing into the darkness. After that night, I asked to be transferred on duty. I could never work alone again, much less during a blackout. I spent days trying to find some logical explanation, maybe a system failure, some kind of invasion that was not registered, but nothing made sense. The company reviewed the files, but curiously the records of those hours simply did not exist. Neither the cameras nor the alarm system, nothing had been saved. As if that part of the dawn had been erased on purpose. Until today, every time there is a power outage, my body goes on alert automatically. I don't know what I saw in that store. I don't know what got in, how it got in, or why it stood there watching me. But that feeling of being hunted, watched, stayed with me. A piece of advice: if you are alone during a blackout, never assume that you are really alone. Sometimes the darkness is only giving you time to realize that there is something, or someone, there with you. The night everything happened, the entire building was silent. It was right after a strong storm. The power went out around 10 p.m. and, as always, I went to the balcony to see if it was general or just in my apartment. It was general. The only sound that was heard was the wind passing between the buildings and some distant sirens. While watching the pitch from the surrounding windows, I noticed something strange. In the apartment next to mine, which, as far as I knew, was empty, there was someone standing on the balcony. A dark, motionless silhouette. I just looked for a few seconds, trying to understand if it was real, or if my eyes were playing tricks because of the lack of light. I went back inside, took my cell phone and tried to turn on the flashlight, but the battery was almost running out. I remember feeling a chill in my back, but I tried to convince myself that it must be some maintenance employee, or someone from the real estate agency checking the apartment next door. Even so, something bothered me. That figure didn't move. Not a step, not a gesture. Just standing there, turned in my direction, as if he was waiting for me to notice. And when I finally turned off my cell phone and looked again through the balcony, there was no one else there. I tried to forget and continue the night normally, even with that strange feeling. I lit some candles and sat on the couch, trying to distract my mind with a book, but I couldn't concentrate. From time to time, I went to the balcony to take a look, and every time I saw the empty space next to it, I tried to convince myself that everything was just an illusion caused by darkness. But deep down, I knew I had seen someone there. It was an uncomfortable certainty, like when you know you're being watched, even without seeing anyone. Around 2 in the morning, when the heat tightened because of the lack of a fan, I decided to open the balcony door to try to get some air. That's when my heart almost stopped. The same silhouette I had seen before. Now it was on my balcony. Stop. Less than 2 meters from me. The light of the city, even weak, lightly illuminated the contour of that figure. Tall, with curved shoulders and completely motionless. I took a step back without thinking. Istrom. I didn't know if I screamed, ran or just closed my eyes. I tried to stay calm, but my breathing was too fast. I retreated to the living room door and closed it tightly, locking the lock. I called the building's concierge, but the line was mute, probably affected by the power outage. I took my cell phone and, even with the connection oscillating, I tried to call someone, but nothing worked properly. I was shaking. The figure was still there. I could see it through the slide between the curtains. She didn't move, she just stared at me. It was as if he was waiting for some reaction from me. I decided to record with my cell phone, hoping to have some proof, or who knows, to be able to better identify what that was. When I opened the curtain a little and pointed the camera, the balcony was empty. I rolled my eyes, incredent, and went to the door to lock it with an extra lock. When I looked through the glass lid, there was nothing. No sign that someone was there. And yet, in the corner of the balcony floor, there was a mark, a kind of dark, wet footprint, as if someone had just come out of the rain. But that night was dry, and no one could have gotten there, not outside on the 8th floor. I stared at that mark for a while, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it had been left there before the blackout. Maybe it was some dirt from when I opened the door earlier. But nothing made much sense. That brand looked recent, fresh. What disturbed me was the fact that I knew exactly what time I had cleaned that floor. And it was dry. I decided not to open the door again, but I took a picture with my cell phone through the slit. The captured image gave me goosebumps. In addition to the mark, there was something reflected on the glass, something that looked like a face leaning against the window, with its eyes fixed on me. At that time, I lowered the door with everything I could, chair, sofa, whatever was within my reach. The feeling was that, even at the top of a building, I wasn't safe. And even worse, that thing knew that. The rest of the night passed slowly, with the blackout persisting for hours. I sat in the living room, my cell phone in my hand, recording any strange noise. Around 5 in the morning, the light suddenly came back, as if nothing had happened. I went out on the balcony with the sun already rising. The footprint was gone. When I went down later to talk to the doorman, he said that the entire building had been without power, but that no one reported anything out of the ordinary. I showed the photo of the footprint and asked if I had seen someone strange circulating. He denied it with conviction. I asked to look at the cameras, but as expected, they stopped recording exactly at the time of the blackout. No record, no explanation. I returned to my apartment still on alert, with the feeling that something had observed me that night and simply left at dawn. Since then, I have developed a habit. Before going to sleep, I look at every window, every crevice, and lock everything with almost paranoid attention. I still have that photo on my phone, even if almost no one believes it. Some people say it was shadow, reflection, imagination, but I know what I saw. And I know what I felt. That wasn't human. It was as if something had been attracted by the blackout, as if the pitch of that dawn had opened a gap for something that normally could not get so close. I've never been so calm in a blackout since then. There was a night, months later, when the energy flashed quickly because of a storm. And even if it came back in seconds, my heart raced as if everything was about to repeat itself. I ran to the balcony and checked the glass with the cell phone lights. There was nothing, no mark, but I stayed there for a long time, looking at the reflection and waiting for something that, fortunately, did not appear. Maybe you'll never show up again, but the fact that it happened once is enough to leave a scar that doesn't fade. I know that many people will read this and think that I was tired, suggested, afraid of being alone during the blackout. It can be, but I also know what I saw and what I felt that night. And if you ever go through a sudden blackout, and you have the feeling that something is watching outside, maybe it's better not to go to the window. Have you ever experienced something strange during a blackout? Share it here in the comments. Maybe you're not that alone. That night, I woke up with a strange silence. Not the kind of comfortable silence, but one that makes you pay attention. The fan had stopped, the alarm clock turned off, and I realized that the power had gone out. I looked at my cell phone. It was 3:08 in the morning. So far, no big deal. Blackouts had already happened in the neighborhood before. But it was when the doorbell rang that I froze. 1, 2, 3 times. He played slowly but insistently. And in the middle of total darkness, that sounded too loud. I got up slowly, still with my heart racing. I went to the door and looked through the peephole, but all I saw was a total pitch. It was as if someone had covered the lens or was glued there, standing without moving. I didn't say anything, I just waited. After about 20 seconds, everything stopped. I turned around, trying to convince myself that it was just some drunk neighbor or a child pranking. But when I entered the room again and went to close the curtain, I clearly saw a person standing on the sidewalk, looking straight in the direction of my window. Without moving, without blinking. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to understand if my eyes were really seeing that. You couldn't see the person's face, only the silhouette, a thin figure, standing exactly in the middle of the sidewalk, as if he knew where my window was. I hid sideways, pulling the curtain without making noise. I took my cell phone to call the police, but the signal was also dead. No power and no signal. I felt completely isolated, as if I was trapped inside my own house with someone outside waiting for me to make a mistake. I went back to the door and checked if it was locked. It was. I looked through the living room window, from another angle, trying to see if that person was still there. Identical, in the same position. I started to think that maybe it was someone waiting for a ride, some resident who was stuck outside. But why stand still like that? Why not knock on the door or call? And why ring the doorbell so many times, and then just disappear from the door? Nothing made sense, and that started to make me panic. I went to the kitchen trying to stay calm, and took a knife, not that I knew how to use it to really defend myself, but it was what I had. I hid behind the corridor wall, watching the entrance to the living room and the main door. Time passed slowly. The wall clock was 3:18 in the morning, when I heard the strangest sound of that night, as if someone was very lightly scratching the outside of my door, downstairs, near the doorknob. There were 3 scratches, spaced slow. My whole body frosted. I wanted to scream, but I could only stay there, motionless, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. After a time that seemed like an eternity, the noises stopped. I went to the window again, very carefully. The figure was no longer on the sidewalk. I tried to see around, see if there was someone crossing the street or moving away, but nothing. It was as if it had evaporated. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't hear a car, nothing. Just silence. But the feeling of being watched remained, that pressure in the air, that discomfort in the stomach. I knew I wasn't safe yet, even without seeing anyone else out there. I went back to the room, but I couldn't relax. Every shadow seemed to have a shape, every creaking of the house made me jump. I sat on the bed, with my cell phone in my hand, trying to decide whether to call the police or not. But I had no proof, and I already imagined that they would say that it was imagination or paranoia because of the blackout. The light was still out, and the cell phone signal was also unstable. That's when I heard a dry noise coming from the kitchen, as if something had hit the floor. I went there again, and one of the chairs on the table was overturned. I swear I had left everything in order before going to sleep. That was the last straw. I ran to the room, locked the door, and pushed the dresser against it. I sat there, with the knife still in my hand, waiting for the light to come back. When it dawned, everything seemed normal again. The power came back, the signal came back, but I couldn't pretend that nothing happened. And the worst, when I went to check the doorbell with video, I realized that it was off with no battery, and even so, I had heard it ring several times. I can't explain that to this day. I couldn't sleep properly for days after that night. Every noise, every flashing light made me get out of bed and check windows and doors. I changed all the locks, bought a new flashlight, and even a more modern security system. But still, every time there is a power outage in the neighborhood, I freeze. That feeling of being watched came back other times, especially when I'm alone at night. And every time I look out the window and see someone standing on the sidewalk, my heart races, even if it's just a neighbor. Maybe I'll never find out what happened that night, if it was someone trying to invade, if it was just paranoia caused by the dark, or if there was something else. But since then, I leave a candle and a knife next to the bed just in case. And if one day you hear your doorbell ringing in the middle of a blackout, think twice before looking through the door. Have you ever experienced something strange during a blackout? Leave it in the comments. It may be more common than you think. I'm not the kind of person who gets scared easily. I live alone in a quiet condominium, one of those that have more silence than movement. That night, around 2 a.m., there was a general power outage. I thought it was something quick, but since the light didn't come back, I decided to pick up my cell phone and go to the kitchen to get a bottle of water. On the way, I passed through the corridor that connects the rooms and came across that large mirror that is on the front wall, right next to the linen closet. I never gave him much ball, until that moment. The cell phone's flashlight was on, kind of weak. When I pointed to the ground so as not to trip, I glanced through the mirror and saw something that stopped me. There was a reflection there behind me. It was no shadow, nor distortion. It was a sharp silhouette, still a couple of steps away from me. But when I turned around, there was absolutely no one in the hallway. It was empty. But when I looked in the mirror again, the figure was still there, immovable, as if the reflection hadn't realized that I turned around. What made me most stuck was the fact that that reflex seemed too right. It was a body, you couldn't see the face or clothes, just the contour, tall, broad shoulders, arms hanging. But the way he was still, straight, almost forced, was wrong. I couldn't take my eyes off that. That's when the cell phone's flashlight started flashing, as if the battery was dying. Instinctively, I pointed the light straight to the mirror, thinking that maybe it was some strange effect of the light. But nothing has changed. The silhouette was still there, firm, as if it were expecting something. Every second, my body seemed to crash more. I decided to do a stupid test. I raised my arm slowly, my normal reflex did the same, but the figure behind did not move. He seemed completely independent of me, as if he were there on his own. That gave me an ice in my stomach that I had never felt before. I took a step back, then one more. Still looking in the mirror, I saw the reflection take a step forward. Just the reflex. The corridor behind me remained empty. And then for the first time in my life, I felt a real terror. Physical. To run or faint. I looked away for a second, just the time to turn my body to really look behind me, almost without breathing. It looked like the same corridor as always, dark and silent. But when I looked at the mirror again, the reflection was no longer there. It wasn't like it had disappeared slowly. It just wasn't anymore. My face was normal. The background of the mirror showed only the wall. For a moment, I stood there, trying to convince myself that it was some kind of illusion, that I was tired, that my mind played a trick. But the feeling of being watched continued, strong and insistent, as if someone was still there with me. I turned off the cell phone's flashlight to save battery and walked back to my room with short steps, trying not to make noise. I closed the door, locked it, and sat on the edge of the bed. I needed some time to assimilate that, but even before I picked up the cell phone again, I heard a slight noise, as if it were a nail scratching something outside the door. Very soft, very continuous. I even thought it was the wind or some noise from the building, but we were blackout. No window was open. No neighbor made noise. Just this sound coming from the corridor, right next to my door. I even approached the door to try to listen better. At this point, I was already sweating cold. I put my eye on the magic eye, but all I saw was darkness. No emergency light, no figure, nothing. Even so, the sound continued. I decided to record it on my cell phone, to see if I could record that sound, and maybe send it to a friend later, just so I wouldn't look crazy. But the recording didn't capture anything. It was as if the cell phone's microphone didn't recognize the noise. But he was still there, clearly audible to me. One part of me wanted to open the door and end it, but the other shouted for me not to do it at all. I walked away slowly again, still with my eye on the door. The sound suddenly stopped. An absolute silence took over the apartment. The kind of silence that, instead of calming down, leaves you on alert. I couldn't even think straight. That's when I realized something even stranger. The hallway mirror. I could see a part of it through the SLE of the bedroom door. And there he was. The reflection. Stood still, exactly as before, as if he was waiting for me. But now he was closer. The image in the mirror didn't move. It was like she was frozen there, staring at me. But the strangest thing was that the reflex was not synchronized with me. It did not imitate my movements. I raised my arm slowly, and he didn't do anything. That ended any doubt that I was just impressed with the situation. Fear took over me in a way I had never felt before. The flashlight light began to fail, flashing nonstop, as if it had been drained out of nowhere. And in the last second before erasing for good, I saw that reflection start smiling. I ran to the room and closed the door tightly. I locked it and pushed the dresser against her. I took my cell phone to call the concierge, but the signal was dead. No bar. No Wi-Fi. As if everything had been disconnected on purpose. I sat on the floor, trying to breathe, trying to understand what was happening. No noise outside, no sign that it was still there. But even in the dark, I swear, I could feel like there was someone watching me outside the door. Stop. Quiet. After almost an hour sitting on the floor, I decided to get up the courage and open the door. The power had not yet returned, and the cell phone's flashlight only gave a weak brightness, but enough to see. I walked slowly down the corridor, trying not to make noise. When I went through the mirror again, I went straight to him with the light. Just my reflection. I stood there, staring, waiting for any strange movement. Nothing happened. But even so, something seemed wrong. The mirror was blurry, as if someone had breathed very closely just before. The next morning, the power came back. I checked my cell phone and saw that several neighbors had sent messages in the groups saying that they also heard strange things during the blackout. One of them commented that, when passing through the corridor on the 5th floor mine, he saw a person standing in front of the mirror and thought it was me. But by the time he mentioned, I was already locked inside the room. It couldn't be me. I could never properly explain what happened, but since that night, I started to avoid looking directly at any mirror in the dark. A few weeks later, I decided to change the mirror. I took him to the living room, thinking that maybe it was just paranoia. But that same night, I woke up with a dry noise, as if something had hit the floor. I got up to look and found the fallen mirror, facing the carpet. When I turned back, there was a strange mark on it, like a palm, but blurred, as if it had been pressed hard on the other side. But no one else had touched that mirror. Since then, I avoid mirrors during blackouts, or when I'm alone. It may seem like bullshit, but sometimes, when I pass by one unintentionally and don't look directly, I feel like something is there, waiting. I don't know if it was the blackout, my mind playing tricks, or something else. All I know is that I could never feel totally alone at home again. Here's the alert. If you're alone during a blackout, avoid staring at mirrors in the dark. You may not like what you will see reflected. The night everything happened, the whole neighborhood plunged into a total blackout. It was not something rare there, especially with the unstable weather, but that night in particular, there was a strange silence in the air. I was alone at home, trying to use the cell phone flashlight to find candles, when I noticed a weak light coming from the window of the house next door. It was my neighbor's TV, but he had traveled that morning, personally warned me. The house should be completely empty. The TV only transmitted static, that intermittent brightness and half bluish. But what made my blood freeze was not the fact that she was on even without energy, but the figure I saw there. Someone was sitting on the couch, with their backs to me, staring at the screen. The silhouette was visible because of the flickering light. I stood still for a few seconds trying to understand. Did someone break into the house? A thief? But why stand still, staring at a screen without an image? I stood at the window, with my cell phone in my hand, thinking if I should call the police or try to call my neighbor. But something was stopping me. The TV light flashed strangely, as if it were pulsating in a rhythm, almost alive. And the figure didn't nod. Not a head movement, not an arm movement, not even a posture adjustment. It was as if she was hypnotized or frozen. I decided to go down to the gate, just to take a better look at the sidewalk. The TV was still flashing, and now it seemed that its light projected something on the wall, but I couldn't see what it was. When I tried to illuminate with my cell phone, the light simply failed. The flashlight went out, and the device restarted by itself. That's when the figure turned his head slightly, as if he had noticed me out there. I didn't hear noise. I didn't see eyes. But I felt it. I felt that he knew I was there. I took a step back without realizing it. My heart was racing, and the feeling was that I was being watched closely, even with the distance. I retreated until I entered the house again, locked the door, and went straight to the upstairs window, with a better view of the neighbor's house. The TV light was still flashing, but now the figure was no longer on the couch. The room seemed empty, but the feeling of presence was still suffocating, as if it had crossed the glass and entered with me. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was someone who broke into the house. Maybe a resident I didn't know. But the house had been empty for weeks, since the neighbor was transferred to another state for work. I remembered because he asked me to keep an eye on him. And I had been doing that, no light, no movement, until that night. I took the phone again to shoot, but the camera only picked up noise and static. No image appeared. I decided not to face that window anymore. I closed the curtains, locked everything again, and stayed in the living room with all the lights off, waiting for the cell phone signal to come back. When he finally came back, I thought about calling the police, but I gave up. How would I explain that I saw a person sitting in an empty house during a blackout, and that the TV light seemed conscious? I myself felt ridiculous just thinking about it. But then came the strangest part. At exactly 3:33 a.m., all the street lights came back, except those at the neighbor's house. Only the TV was still on, flashing. The next day I went there. I called, knocked, tried to open the gate. Everything locked as always. But on the sofa in the living room, you could see a sunken mark, as if someone had been sitting there for a long time. I called the former resident. He said that no one had the key but him. And that, since he moved, no one has entered that house. I almost said what I saw, but I held in. Since then, I've never seen the light turn on again. But every time there is a blackout, I keep an eye on it, because even if the power runs out, the TV in that house never turns off.